James had always thought of himself as a guy who was grounded in reality. It became intolerable for him to be alone in his flat when he relocated to the hectic metropolis of Seattle in order to fulfill a new job. The walls resounded with the sound of loneliness, and the accumulation of empty takeaway containers only served to exacerbate the situation. During that time, he made the decision to have a dog as a friend in order to fill the vacuum. There were a lot of dogs excitedly barking and wagging their tails at the shelter, but there was one dog that stuck out. A scruffy dog with golden hair and eyes that were so profound and melancholy that they seemed to store decades' worth of tales that had never been spoken. His tag had the name Buster, but James did not believe that it was an appropriate moniker for him. The dog approached James with reluctance and pressed a worn-out white ball into his hand with his nose. He crouched down, and the dog gradually approached. James hushed Teddy as he said, "I'll call you Teddy." Bringing Teddy back home, however, was not the fairy tale he had envisioned it to be. It seemed as if the dog was clutching to that shredded ball as if it were a lifeline. The dog was far away. Never once did he show James his affection by wagging his tail or curling up next to him on the sofa when James arrived home. The alternative was for Teddy to stand at the front door. In an unusual and tight position, with his ears pricked and his body taut, as if he were waiting for someone who never showed up. Over the course of many months, James experimented with everything, including toys, gifts, and extended strolls in the park. Teddy, on the other hand, maintained his distance, his eyes always looking for something that James was unable to comprehend. James took the difficult choice, which was accompanied by a tremendous burden of guilt. Maybe Teddy would be better if he were to return to the shelter and live with a new family. Around the time that he was packing Teddy's possessions in the garage, a little envelope that had yellowed and fluttered out of an old blanket. It was as if Teddy, who had been dozing off throughout the morning, suddenly sprung to life. It was the first time that his tail was wagging frantically, and his nose was pushing the letter with a passionate exclamation of joy. When James took it up, he was perplexed. There was no mistaking the words, despite the fact that the paper was frail and the ink had faded. "To the person who discovers my Buster, therefore, I am no longer here if you are reading this. My physicians have informed me that I do not have much time left, and the most difficult aspect is not the agony. Rather, it is the realization that I will never see my closest friend again. When I was going through everything, Buster was there for me. It was his very first toy, and he is quite fond of his white ball. I used to get home from work around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which is why he waits at the door at that time. Moreover, if he seems withdrawn and depressed, it is because he is missing me. Would you kindly adore him for me? I have never seen a better dog than he is." Mr. Daniel, when James glanced down at Teddy, also known as Buster, who was now staring at him with those soulful eyes, and had his tail beating lightly on the floor, his eyesight became blurry because to the tears that he was crying. A number of things, including the peculiar conduct, the white ball, and the waiting outside the entrance, made perfect sense. Teddy had not been dismissing James in any way. He was experiencing grief. James knelt down and wrapped his arms around the dog while he remained on his knees. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he said in a low voice. "I didn't know." In addition, for the very first time, Teddy moved in close to James, placing his head on his shoulder as if to convey the message, "It's all right. Here I am, prepared." From that point on, everything was different. James posted the letter that Daniel had written beside the door, framing it as a reminder of the love that Teddy had experienced and the love that he still had at his disposal. Furthermore, on a daily basis at 5 o'clock in the evening, rather than waiting by himself, Teddy would bring his ball to James, fully set to play, because there are times when understanding is the first step toward mending. In addition, the hearts that are the most shattered are the ones that tend to teach us the most about love. In the course of the weeks that went into months, James and Teddy's relationship became stronger in ways that James had never imagined were conceivable. There was a time when the dog would keep his distance from him, but now he would follow him from room to room. His eyes, which had been sad, now shining with trust. However, there was one enigma that James was unable to solve, and that was the one who had loved Teddy before he did. To Daniel. For James, the name remained in his memory like a novel that was left incomplete. James brought out the letter once again and investigated the deteriorating handwriting of the letter as Teddy was sleeping next to him on the sofa one evening. A notion occurred to him. What if Daniel had parents and siblings? And what if there was still someone out there who was curious about what had happened to Teddy? It was with a resolute exhalation that James opened his laptop and started looking for anything. The name Daniel was not an unusual one. Yet, when he considered the information included in the letter, which described a guy who had gone away due to sickness and who had owned a golden-haired dog called Buster, he thought that there could be a trail. After spending a considerable amount of time looking through old social media postings and obituaries, he finally came across it. A memorial page for Daniel Reyes, a music instructor who had passed away from cancer 2 years before. There was a snapshot of a guy with nice eyes and a smile on his face, and behind it, there was a photo of a stream of comments from former pupils and friends. Only one stood out. Each and every day, Danny, I miss you. I really hope that Buster was able to find a nice home. It was the dog that you loved more than anything else. By Lisa Reyes, who posted this. It is Lisa. Is it a sister? Is it a wife? James felt his heartbeat speed. After a moment of hesitation, he proceeded to send a kind tribute via the memorial page. Hello there. My name is James. I believe I took in Daniel's dog as my own. Although his name was Buster, I came to refer to him as Teddy. I came upon a letter. He was surprised by how quickly the response arrived. Oh my God. Do you have some Buster? It was just an hour away. Lisa Reyes lived there. On the next Saturday, when James and Teddy arrived at her modest, bright home, Teddy froze the instant the vehicle door opened. James and Teddy had made their way there. His nose seemed to raise into the air as if he had caught a fragrance that he had not experienced in years, and his ears began to quiver. Teddy then raced for the porch, where Lisa was standing with her hands pressed to her lips, before James had even had a chance to unbuckle his leash. She said in a hushed voice, Buster, with his whole body shaking. Teddy came to a rest at her feet after skidding to a standstill. Then, with a cry, he threw his white ball at her shoes, exactly as he had done for James on the very first day that he had been at the shelter. Lisa's eyes welled up with tears. While she was kneeling, she encircled him with her arms. She spat. You remember me, as she struggled to speak. You remember Danny. At the same time that James stared with his throat constricted, Teddy showered Lisa with kisses, his tail wagging so vigorously that his whole body trembled. At that moment, it seemed as if a component of him had at long last been reassembled. James was informed by Lisa about everything, including how Daniel had brought Teddy up from the time he was a puppy, and how the two had been inseparable up to the time when the disease seized over. In the aftermath of Daniel's passing, she was the one who handed up Teddy to the shelter, despite the fact that she was unable to provide anything for him. At the same time as she was wiping her tears, she added, I prayed every night that he would find someone kind, and it was him who brought you to Danny's letter. That is not a confluence of events. James's swallow was forceful. I had planned on bringing him back to the shelter, she said. If only I hadn't discovered that message. Squeezing his hand, Lisa reached across the table and began to do so. But you did. Now, Teddy, also known as Buster, had 2 homes. James kept him throughout the week, but on the weekends, they would go to Lisa's home. When they arrived, Teddy would run inside the house like a puppy, smelling every corner as if to make sure that nothing had changed. A picture book of Daniel and Teddy's experiences, including hikes, visits to the beach, and lazy Sundays, was shown to James by Lisa. James found out that the white ball was from Daniel's previous soccer squad, and that Teddy's peculiar position at the door was precisely how he used to wait for Daniel to get home. And as James saw Teddy tuck himself onto Lisa's lap, comfortable in a manner that he had never been before, he came to the realization that something was at play. The purpose of this was not limited to just reuniting Teddy with a piece of his history. His tale needed to be expanded with the addition of a new chapter. Because love is not about making up for something that has been lost. The key is to make place for more things. Teddy remained the bridge between two worlds even after the passage of time, despite the fact that his muzzle had become gray and his feet had become somewhat slower. The affection that James and Lisa had for the scruffy golden puppy, who had helped them both in ways that neither of them could have anticipated, had brought them together to form a strong friendship. James observed Teddy loitering by the front entrance once again during the fall afternoon, when the leaves were turning flaming hues of red and gold amongst the changing scenery. It was not in his usual stiff attitude. Rather, he was peacefully holding his white ball in his teeth with a gentle grip. In the same manner that he had done on the day that they first met, Teddy pushed the ball into his palm as James knelt down next to him. "You want to go see Lisa, buddy?" Inquiring while rubbing behind Teddy's ears, James questioned. In response, the dog's tail made a single thumping sound. However, when they got to Lisa's residence, they discovered that something had changed. Unlike his typical behavior, Teddy did not bind up the stairs. Rather than that, he made his way carefully to the backyard, where he saw a little stone positioned under a maple tree. This was a memorial monument that James had never seen previously. To honor the memories of Daniel Reyes, a cherished educator, brother, and friend, until we meet again, Teddy sat down next to it, letting out a soft sigh as he planted his chin in the ground and laid down. While Lisa had been tending to the plants, she suddenly glanced up in astonishment. She murmured, "He never does that," while she waited. Not even when Danny first, her voice became less audible. The lump that James felt in his throat began to grow. He came to a crouching position next to Teddy and ran his hand over the dog's back. "You miss him today, huh?" With his eyes half closed, Teddy let out a long, deep breath. The wind rustled the leaves above them, sprinkling sunshine like golden dust over the three of them, the man who had given Teddy a second chance, the lady who had loved him first, and the dog who had loved them all in return. As James was getting ready to depart later that evening, Lisa stopped him at the door, where he was standing. "You know," she said in a low voice, "Danny always said that dogs don't just love. They remember," perpetually, putting pressure on James' hand. She pushed the white ball. "I think he'd want you to have this. It was a peaceful journey back home." Teddy continued to sleep in the back seat, his breathing still regular and slow. At the moment when James arrived at the garage, he did not immediately exit the vehicle. Instead of that, he rolled the ball over in his palms and examined the worn markings and ragged edges of the basketball. After that, he flashed a grin. Love, he came to know, is not something that can be measured in years. Things like letters discovered, doors left open, and balls dropped at feet like promises are all examples of moments that are used to quantify it. As Teddy made his way inside, he took a moment to gently prod James' hand with his nose before curling up in his preferred position. James was aware of the following. Some relationships are eternal. They are just getting deeper.